What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, December 5th, 2018, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations here. Well, obviously, tomorrow, or rather today, this morning, was dominated by the memorial service for George Herbert Walker Bush, and it just went on and on and on, and all the luminaries were there. The Clintons were there, the Obamas were there, and basically after a while I switched over to BBC America and watched old Star Trek reruns. But that's now over, and they're flying the coffin back to Texas, where final interment, I guess, will take place tomorrow. So that closes that chapter of American history. But again, the history being presented by the corporate media is far less than complete. And they're trying to portray Bush as this incredible statesman and a hero, and again, credit where credit is due. He did fly dive bombers in World War II. There's no question about that. He was actually in combat. And I'm going to say something that may surprise a lot of people. Obviously, I'm opposed to the Bush family and their policies and the harm that they have done to the world in general here. But George Herbert Walker Bush was very good at what he did. And even if you don't agree with what he did, you could have a certain amount of respect for the man, for his capabilities, as opposed to, for example, his sons, plural. But there are a lot of things about his career that people really don't pay attention to. I mean, basically, he was born into money. His father, Prescott Bush, was part of Brown Brothers Harriman, which helped fund the Nazis' rise to power. And having a lot of money gave him a lot of opportunities. And so he was definitely had a lot of advantages growing up here. And we need to go back and look at his career as president during the first Iraq War, when Bush promised the Iraqi soldiers safe passage out of Kuwait. And then once they were on the highway, U.S. warplanes bombed vehicles at both ends of the convoy to lock them there and just blew everything up. And it was called the Highway of Death. And some of the pictures out of that were pretty ugly. So, and then of course there was the Iran-Contra Scandal, which has been revived in the American mind by the Tom Cruise movie Made in America. And while Bush and Clinton were only briefly mentioned within it, they were central to what was going on. Bush, of course, at the time was vice president under Ronald Reagan. And they were running this covert operation to arm the Nicaraguan Contras. And because Congress had not approved it, the CIA was funding it by bringing cocaine into this country, laundering it through this network of financial institutions set up by the Clintons in Arkansas to pay for it all. And it was all very, very secret. Barry Seal was one of their pilots. And it all became public when the Nicaraguans shot down one of the smuggling aircraft and captured Eugene Hassenfuss alive, who basically just sang and tore the lid off of everything. And there were hearings in Congress. And when George Herbert Walker Bush Sr. became president, he pardoned these Iran-Contra criminals, including Caspar Weinberger, Robert McFarland, and Elliot Abrams. Then, of course, there were the connections between the Bush family and certain Mexican drug cartels. And apparently, the relationship between the Bush and Salinas families was a matter of public record. And George Herbert Walker Bush had developed close personal ties with Carlos Salinas and his father, Raul Salinas Lozano. Now, Raul Salinas Lozano was the family patriarch, the father of Carlos and Raul Jr., and he was a leading figure in narcotics dealings that also involved his son and his son-in-law. And former President George Herbert Walker Bush and Raul Salinas Lozano were intimo amigos. So, lot of connections there. And the corporate media is going to make it all go away. What was it Shakespeare was saying about Julius Caesar? The evil that men do live after them, the good is often interred with the bones. It does seem as if the reverse is certainly going on now with George Herbert Walker Bush. Okay, so let's get into the conflict zones and see what's going on here. Secretary of Defense James Mattis is now getting on the bandwagon to bring an end to the war in Afghanistan and aid the regional leaders in their efforts to bridge long-standing disagreements, saying that the conflicts in Afghanistan have now gone on for 40 years. Of course, he's not talking about just the 17 years the United States has been in there. He's talking about going back to Charlie Wilson's war against the Soviet Union, which was a 9-year battle. And ever since then, it's been a case of the Taliban trying to take back control of their country from the imposed U.S. puppet rulers. And it has gone on for way too long. And I think it is time for it to stop. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And I can see them already setting the stage for a graceful exit out of Afghanistan. They don't want to admit they're losing militarily, even though that's very obviously what's going on. So they're going to look for some way they can have an exit strategy that makes it look like we magnanimously have decided that it is time for all of this to come to an end, and we will have peace, and we'll negotiate a settlement, which is going to be tricky because all the Taliban want is for the United States and their puppet rulers to get out and let them go back to running their country. And there's going to be a lot of opposition to that, first of all from the oil companies, who are enjoying high profits from having access to that pipeline at below market rates, which was a big part of what this war was all about. And of course, American drug lords and pharmaceutical corporations are enjoying access to very low-cost opium, also coming out of Afghanistan. I think back to when Donald Trump was running for office in 2016 and was openly critical of these endless wars in the Middle East, and yet here he is stuck in another one in Syria. And far from looking at an exit strategy for Syria, the U.S. looks like they just want to dig on in and turn Syria into the next Afghanistan. Now, the official story is the U.S. wants an enduring defeat of ISIS, but the Russians and the Syrians are already doing that. But the Pentagon is determined to stay in the country. Again, they don't want to admit they didn't win this one. So the U.S. apparently is prepared for decades of conflict inside Syria. Now, interestingly enough, with the U.S. gearing up for this open-ended involvement in Syria, U.S. Envoy James Jeffrey looks like he's trying to undercut any possibility of peace, demanding that the world pull the plug on the Russian-led Astana talks. In other words, they're saying that the Syria peace talks led by Russia must end. Because if anybody is going to organize and run the peace talks, it will be the United States of America. And the United States of America is not part of the current process. The Astana talks involve Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And Jeffrey says it's a rather strange initiative, and he wants it scrapped in favor of a new UN effort, presumably one in which the U.S. would have a priority role. The U.S. has never supported the Astana process in the first place, and has been demanding that the Syrian war involve unconditional regime change. Now, Russia says they want the end state to be settled with a free and fair election, which would include the possibility of existing officials running for office. And the U.S. says that is just not going to be allowed. So they've got a mess over there. The conflict is unfortunately heating up. The Syrian military is now deploying troops and battle tanks near Idlib. And apparently, Khalid al-Mohammed, who's a prominent figure of the Syrian opposition, says that there is an international agreement to eliminate Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Idlib. Now, al-Mohammed is known as the godfather of the reconciliation process, which took place in southern Syria in 2018. And apparently this UAE-based businessman persuaded thousands of former Free Syria Army fighters in the governorates of Daraa and Al-Quneitra to join the ranks of the Syrian Arab Army 5th Assault Corps. So this was the guy who got him to basically change sides and go back to fighting for the Syrian government. So apparently units of the Syrian Army's 4th Armored Division have been redeployed from the northern Al-Suwaida countryside to front lines in northern Latakia countryside. And it looks like there's going to be a major, major battle there as well. Now, the Syrian army is raising the alert over the Israeli Air Force activity along the Lebanese border. And apparently Israeli planes have been operating along that border, stalking the region several times last week. Now, in this case, it may not be a prelude to an attack on Syria. Of course, you can't know one way or the other, because Israel is starting to make stink face at Lebanon again. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. Now, the other day, as you know, there was an air attack by Israel into Syria that Syria claims was successfully repelled. Israel is saying otherwise. Apparently, the report of an Israeli warplane being down did turn out to be false. And a lot of people were wondering why Syria wasn't using the new Russian weapons they have been given. Apparently, while they are operational for training purposes, they have not been activated and put on combat status. But that apparently is about to happen. And according to General Kenneth McKenzie, who's the nominee to head the U.S. CENTCOM, is saying that the activation of Russian S-400 missile defense systems in Syria will pose an increased threat to American troops and U.S.-led coalition forces. And he's saying they're still working on out how they're going to be able to continue to operate inside Syria. And it's going to be tricky. Now, as you know, a little while ago, there was this big stink where Turkey decided to buy Russia's S-400 missile instead of the American Patriot. And even more to the point, they're doing the sale in their domestic currencies. They're not going through the dollar. And the United States got all huffy about it. You know, why are you dealing with Russians? And finally, Turkey's foreign minister, Mevlut Cavusoglu, basically came on out and said, the S-400 is just better. It is vastly superior to the Patriot air defense system built by the U.S., and Turkey had to go with the better system. And they're saying basically Patriot failed to meet the Turkish military's air defense requirements. Turkey then went to other countries and finally settled on Russia. And the deal is basically done. Turkey is saying that Russia gave them the best deal. It's a done deal. They'll be open to other proposals in the future, but for right now, they're going with the Russian S-400. Now, up in Ukraine, they're really pushing on this Kerch Strait incident. And again, the propaganda is Russia simply hijacked these Ukrainian warships in open waters. They've kidnapped the crew. How dare they? How dare they? Ignoring the fact that the Ukrainian warships and tugboat violated the rules of using the strait, which is Russian territorial water here. But according to this article coming on out of Voice of America News, NATO is getting set to meet as Ukraine seeks support against the Russian attacks. And that's how it's now being described. The Russian attacks on the Ukrainian naval vessels. And apparently, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is going to be joining other foreign ministers for a 2-day meeting in Brussels, where American demands for more military spending from NATO allies will also be on the agenda. Now, Kiev is warning of the likelihood of an all-out war with its neighbors is dangerously high after Russia fired on its vessels in the Azov Sea and detained the Navy personnel. Now, of course, Moscow is saying it was an intentional provocation on the part of Ukraine, and from all indications, Moscow is absolutely correct on it. But an incident is an incident, and if you're trying to foment hostility and tension, you just grab whatever you can use here. So Ukraine and NATO are now talking about a ban on Russia entering all ports of quote-unquote civilized countries. So they're talking a naval blockade, which is an act of war here. And they're also putting on the table the agenda to end the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. See, it's really ultimately all about the money. And of course, more sanctions on Russia. So Ukraine's President Poroshenko is out there screaming once again that Russia has 80,000 troops in Crimea. But Poroshenko has been screaming imminent Russian invasion ever since he came to power in that coup d'etat. Was claiming that there were Russian tanks on the border. They were ready to invade. It was going to happen anytime. And this article is basically saying Poroshenko is claiming Russia has 80,000 troops, 1,400 artillery and missile systems, 900 tanks, 2,300 armored vehicles, 500 planes, and 300 helicopters stationed on its border in Crimea. Now, if Russia really did have that, and Russia wanted to do something, they'd be in Kiev in 2 days. That's a huge force. No evidence to support any of it. And as I said, Poroshenko has cried Russian wolf way, way too many times. But Ukraine is calling up their reservists for added training, saying the country needs to beef up its defenses to counter the threat of a Russian invasion. They're still pushing this thing. Now, the Kremlin is saying Poroshenko's statement is an absurd attempt to inflame tensions. And relations between the two countries have been strained further following that November 25th incident in which the Russian Coast Guard fired upon and seized these 3 Ukrainian naval vessels, which basically violated Russia's territorial waters. And it wasn't like Russia said they couldn't go in there, but there are rules. When you are transiting waterways that are territorial waters of other countries, there are rules. There are rules to go through the Panama Canal. There's rules to go through the Erie Canal. There's rules to go through the Suez Canal. And there are rules to go through the Kerch Strait. And the Ukrainian ships blatantly defied them. Now, a little bit of a whoopsie may have happened because, as you know, we're going into this holiday season where soldiers who are stationed overseas are given access to two-way television so they can talk to their families, and everybody would wish themselves a wonderful holiday. And apparently one of the soldiers mentioned that he was stationed in Ukraine, U.S. soldier stationed in Ukraine. So you think about that one a little bit. Meanwhile, the United States is making indications they want to deploy some of their military on the island of Cyprus. And Russia is saying that that is absolutely not acceptable and that Moscow will have to take response measures if there is a U.S. military buildup in Cyprus. And according to information from multiple sources, Washington is taking actions to ensure the possibility of building up its military presence in Cyprus. Everybody's gearing up for the war we all know is coming. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And NATO has now hopped on the bandwagon, so to speak, of Russia's supposed violation of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Now, as you know, Trump has accused Russia of being in violation of the INF Treaty and has threatened to pull out of that and commence to build up America's nuclear arsenal. Now, the INF basically bans ground-launched medium-range missiles that carry nuclear warheads that have a range between 310 and 3,400 miles. And it may seem kind of nitpicky-ish, but when the agreement was passed, it was basically a way for both the United States and, at the time, the Soviet Union, to basically get rid of entire classes of nuclear weapons and not have to maintain them, not have to spend all the money to keep them up. And this was at a time when the Soviet Union was really struggling to finance its military. So NATO has now issued a statement supporting the U.S. accusations of Russian violations. Mind you, there's no proof. Nobody's gone in and done an inspection. It's another version of Assad has sarin gas or Saddam Hussein has nuclear weapons. It's just an accusation, but it's basically being used to push the agenda. Now, Trump is threatening to start building intermediate range nuclear missiles, and Russia is saying that, yes, if you pull out of this treaty, we'll do it too. There'll be a new arms race, which, of course, the military-industrial complex is going to love. More money. Less money for you, more money for them. That was the whole point of Cold War I and now Cold War II. And Putin is saying the Kremlin will respond appropriately if the United States pulls out of the Cold War-era nuclear weapons treaty that prohibits these intermediate and shorter-range nuclear missiles. So the arms race is on. Now, interestingly enough, Trump is getting support from U.S. Senator Jim Imhoff, who's the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. So he's all set to go. He's all set to, yes, let's build these rockets here. It now turns out that the United States had planned to pull out of the INF. They were just looking for an excuse because apparently funds to start building these new missiles were in the Pentagon budget. And so they're just looking to put the blame on Russia for the United States' plans to violate the INF. So, anyway. Mad Dog Mattis is calling Putin a slow learner and bemoans the worsened U.S. relations with Russia. Well, I'm sorry, that's pure posturing. Mattis is one of the reasons that relations with Russia are in decline. So, apparently Mattis accused Russia's president of denseness and creating animosity against his people, which are very incendiary comments. What's Mattis going to do next? Say that Putin dresses funny and his dog is really ugly? It's amazing here. Meanwhile, the U.S. ambassador to Poland, Georgette Mosbacher, is saying Poland is the defense bastion against Russia. That's got to be making the Polish people very nervous. They're being basically set up to be the bullet catchers if something happens. And says Poland will play a key role in the global strategy of Donald Trump, and saying that Russia will give up their provocations. Russia's not the one who's provoking. Russia's just sitting there trying to keep things calm. It's amazing. All righty, turning on down to the Middle East here. Yemen is getting really ugly. As we mentioned yesterday, extreme fighting, including artillery, has broken out again in Hodeidah. And according to this article coming out of Global Research, there are 85,000 children dead, 14 million at the risk of starvation. And yet the American and British governments, who have the ability to stop the Saudi war machine by simply refusing to sign any more checks or sell those weapons to Saudi Arabia, they keep it going, because arms sales are much more important than the lives of children, especially those children. They don't count. And this is coming from Save the Children, which is a charity, and they're saying it is a mess over there, and it really is. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the conflict zones around the world. We're talking specifically about Yemen. And apparently, there is a possibility there will be peace talks, and representatives from the Yemeni government and the Houthi rebels, which think they are the government, are due to meet in Sweden this week for United Nations-sponsored talks aimed at ending this 3-year-long war that has just devastated the country. Now, the United Nations has refused to reveal the exact date and venue, probably for security reasons, but the talks are expected to take place on December 5th or 6th, close to the capital, Stockholm, which would be today or tomorrow. And apparently sources have told Al Jazeera these latest discussions could yield some major breakthroughs. And that would be really good. Now, getting on over to Saudi Arabia, the situation with Khashoggi's murder and Trump's basically glossing it over for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is turning into a major diplomatic whoopsie. And as you know, yesterday morning, CIA Director Gina Haspel testified before a select group of senators presenting the CIA's information, which basically said there was absolutely no doubt the Crown Prince ordered Khashoggi's murder. And a lot of people are now starting to look at this very obvious double standard coming out of Donald Trump, because when the Skripals were poisoned, supposedly, and again, there's reason to doubt that, it's Putin. It's Putin. Putin's bad. Putin's bad. Putin's evil. Got to do something about Putin. Here we have Khashoggi with hard evidence that he did, in fact, order this hit by his subordinates. And Trump's attitude is, well, he wasn't physically in the room, therefore it's no big deal. And again, he was very forthcoming in saying it's all about business, that they want Saudi Arabia to go on buying weapons from the United States, and that was willing to basically cut him some slack. But senators are saying, no, there has to be a stance here. And what makes it really embarrassing for Donald Trump, of course, is that the White House had previously forbidden Haspel to testify to the Senate. So this is looking really bad for Donald Trump, and I have absolutely no doubt that it will be seized on by his critics. Over in Pakistan, they're messing around with the entire world here. The United States previously had been sending $3 billion in security assistance to Pakistan, but it's been canceled because Washington accused its former ally of failing to do enough to combat terrorism. And this figure is actually higher than the original $1.3 billion quoted by the Trump administration earlier last month. Regardless of the figure, what's going on is that this hostility and bullying toward Pakistan is pushing Pakistan into the sphere of influence of Russia and China. And remember, Pakistan is the only nuclear-armed majority Muslim nation. And they're now being pushed into the other side. And that is definitely not good. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had a meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and reaffirmed the commitment to confront Iran with maximum pressure. We're going to confront the totality of the Iranian regime's threats through maximum pressure. Well, unfortunately, Rouhani has given Pompeo grist for the mill, as it were, because Rouhani is now threatening to block the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical waterway through which a lot of the world's oil flows. Meanwhile, Iran has basically come on out saying that even after the United States pulled out of the P5+1 deal and reinstated the sanctions, apparently the U.S. actually made efforts to try and restart negotiations. And Rouhani said the U.S. approached Tehran 11 times. Iran rejected it firmly. Well, what the United States was clearly trying to do is they were going to come on in and say, we'll remove the sanctions if you'll renegotiate the P5+1 deal to include your ballistic missiles. And Iran firmly said no. And it's understandable why Iran would do that. Iran has a right to defense. All nations have a right to defense. And the recent history of the United States has been full of examples of the United States going into a country and negotiating the surrender of their weapons of deterrence, followed by an invasion. They did it to Iraq. They did it to Syria. And it's a pattern. And Iran knows that they would be idiots to disarm themselves in the face of a clearly belligerent nation here. Meanwhile, over at the United Nations, Iran's mission to the UN has issued a statement urging the United States to halt abusing the Security Council to increase its mischievous intentions against Iran. And basically what's at issue is the United States is trying to arbitrarily reinterpret the provisions of Resolution 2231. Now, 2231 endorses the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the P5+1 nuclear deal, and the United States is trying to get the Security Council to basically go on in and, again, add the ballistic missiles, to basically say Iran will not undertake any activity related to ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons. Well, it's really a non-issue when you remember Iran does not have nuclear weapons. But the issue is that Israel wants Iran disarmed of even missiles carrying conventional warheads. Meanwhile, over at Reuters, they came out with a little propaganda piece about Iran and basically intentionally conflated two different series of missiles, basically talking about Iran's air-to-air missiles. But the U.S. isn't interested in Iran's air-to-air missiles because the U.S. air-to-air missiles are superior. But basically, Reuters was out there trying to pound the fear wagon, or the fear drum, if you will, by conflating the two. All right, we got a caller on the line. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I bet you didn't worry about Saudi Arabia's air-to-air missiles, huh? Because they look the other way with them, huh?
Yes.
You know, what a scam, you know. Blame Iran for everything, Russia. You know, I mean, it's all about economic hegemony in the Middle East.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you know, the U.S. is so spread thin, Mike. Do you realize, like, if their lines of just supplies get cut, these people will be, like, in no man's land, like, for a long time. Like, if our economy collapses, and do you realize that? Like, you got so many troops around the world, and they probably don't have the supplies you think they have. You know what I mean? Like, it's just skeleton crews on a lot of these areas, and it's just like they'd be stuck there indefinitely.
We have been at war for 17 years. The stockpiles are drawn down. And a little lesson from history, when Germany collapsed at the end of World War II, they didn't have the money to bring their troops home. Those who weren't put in concentration camps basically just, you know, stopped where they were and started life all over again. And it was like this German diaspora all across Europe.
And Mike, what's going to happen to Poland, Romania, all these countries that they get money, like the leadership, not the people, but the leadership get oodles of cash from the U.S. What's going on with, like, the world's moving away from the dollar? Mike, when that happens, do you realize these countries are not going to get these oodles of cash anymore? Because we won't have that, luxury of giving that money to pay them off.
Yes.
So they're just going to pivot to the next biggest country or the bigger economic country, and that'd be China, which will send them oodles of yuan, renminbi, whatever.
Yep.
Along with the Russians. And hey, Mike, what's your take? Because Qatar's was a founding member of OPEC.
Yes.
I know they only have produced 600,000 barrels of oil, a day, and it's a small player in the market. But for them to, in January, pack up and leave, this tells you there's like just this pivot going on, right? I mean, with OPEC Plus coming up with the Russians and Saudis, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's just not going to be on the mainstream news, because. And I look at Qatar leaving. I think this is important. It's important.
I agree. I think this could be the beginning of the breakup of OPEC, because the other members of OPEC are very dissatisfied with Saudi Arabia's close relationship with the United States and feel that they have been taken advantage of by this deal. And remember, all of this goes back to that petrodollar deal that was launched after Nixon ended gold convertibility. Where the United States went to all of these oil-producing nations and said, if you will sell your oil only for the U.S. dollar and invest that money in the United States, we'll protect you militarily from other countries, and you'll all get very, very rich. And it did work to a certain extent, and it did keep global demand for the U.S. dollar very, very high. But again, other countries are starting to move away from the dollar, and the U.S. is responding militarily. When Iraq wanted to sell their oil for the euro, the U.S. invaded. When Libya wanted to sell their oil for the gold dinar, the U.S. invaded. And I think Saudi Arabia is probably pivoting close to Russia, so that when they decide they're going to stop accepting dollars for the oil, the United States will be deterred from attacking them.
And by the way, Qatar shares the South Pars gas field with Iran.
Yes.
That's the largest gas reserves in the world, right? I believe is the Qatar and Iranian gas fields in South. But Mike, I just think that's the pivot. Like, we're seeing it happen.
Yeah.
Like right before our eyes, this pivot away. And you know what? We can't do anything about it as individuals. We can let people know what's going on, and it's up to other people to do the research. But that's all I got to say today, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
So, Mike, it seems like, hey, Mr. Mike, it seems like there's, with the elitists and everything, with Trump, there seems like factions of one another fighting, and I think this is a transference of wealth away from once was, America, and that's what it is. We're being looted, and we're being looted from the banksters and this and that, and it's just crazy. And like Dustin said, this is insane times.
Okay, you got kind of muffled there toward the end, but obviously when you have a government that is on a war footing, they will have a wartime economy, which, as you say, it loots the people. It has to plunder the wealth of the nation to pay for the war.
Absolutely, and I think there's factions within, like, the power structures, the the Anglo-Saxons, the Russians, and the Chinese, and they're just fighting for power, and then it just happens to be our turn to fall.
Well, I think it is our turn to fall here, and again, in the age of nuclear weapons, this is really dangerous. And I'm sure that the military commanders are convinced that they can keep the war cold, that it's going to be just like the good old days in the 1950s and 1960s with the money pouring on in and promotions piling up. But again, the new factor is all of the automation that are on these weapon systems. And in at least 2 known provable instances, these automated systems have led to weapons being unleashed when they shouldn't have been.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought I had more hope in mankind, but I don't. Not anymore.
Well, I think the vast majority of people are good people. Unfortunately, through some flaw in our mental makeup, we tend to obey these crazy sociopathic individuals who lead us off to war. And maybe in prehistoric times there was a survival necessity. Maybe our willingness to follow somebody into battle and club the adversaries on the head is why we're here and they are not. But I think definitely in the nuclear age, it's a little out of touch.
I think you're right. Well, you have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. From what you read earlier, and it was like maybe 20 minutes of what's going on around the world, I am more than convinced that we are heading toward either a nuclear or a war which is just as bad as a conventional war, and also the fact that we're about to have another major recession or depression. So we have the economy really bad, and you have idiots and sick people running the military. You're going to have a war, and unfortunately, people are going to be shocked by it. They're going to be scared by it, and unfortunately, aren't that many people aware of it.
I think more people are aware of it. I think a lot of people are kind of in denial. They're trying to avoid thinking about it. That may be one of the reasons why we're starting to see such bizarre behavior in the general population. It's basically an avoidance strategy, if you will. But I think a lot of people, certainly around here where we're sitting on a first strike nuclear target, everybody here is very concerned about it. We've actually been at war now, for at least 17 years, but it's been low intensity. The fear is it's going to go to high intensity, and yes, at some point, whichever side is losing, we'll turn those keys in the missile silos. Jim, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back.
Sure.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take another phone call from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, what's up there, Mike? I don't know if you were talking about it. I just got out, turned you on at home. Mad Hog, Mattis, and Pompeo, their saber rattling they've been doing the last couple of days about Russia.
Yes.
And all. And, I tweeted Trump today, get rid of these neocons. They're destroying your administration. You're going to be one-term president. I tried to call the White House today at the switchboard. By the way, folks, it's 202-456-1111, but they were closed in mourning for the war criminal that everybody's yelling about now.
Well, Trump declared today a federal holiday, so the banks are closed. There's no postal delivery, and so government offices are closed.
Right. I was surprised I got my little package from InfoWars there with toothpaste and bone broth. I was surprised that it even arrived today, but I don't know. Maybe it came from UPS. But anyway, like I said, people need to do that. They need to. You can tweet to Trump. Sooner or later, some of this stuff gets through to him. Some of the stuff he sees. A lot of stuff he doesn't seem to understand. He's not the most computer literate guy in the world. He doesn't seem to think, besides his own tweets, that he could go into YouTube and all over the net and find different sites, different type of people that if he had hired them for national security and for other posts like that, we wouldn't be in a situation we're in. A guy like Paul Craig Roberts, for instance, he could. I'm sure Roberts would have been glad to serve. Somebody like Ray McGovern, who used to be with the CIA and is a real patriot. I know he doesn't like Trump, but I'm sure he would have been willing to serve.
Yes.
Because he's a patriot. But those are the type of people. But he doesn't seem to understand. There's more to what's going on than the fake news network, the crap news network, and nothing but crap news network. He doesn't seem to understand that. He seems to think he's going to get all the information he needs by listening to a fool like Sean Hannity, who basically gives you mostly talking points. He won't really, he gives you everything the military industrial complex still wants you to hear.
Yep.
Or somebody like the Fox. What are those morning show with Fox News in the morning there with that idiot Brian Kilmeade and the other fool there? I mean, he seems to think that's where he's getting real news from. It's not. It's just basically just the other side of the coin from the crap news network. It's really garbage, and you can see it the way they're all lauding this war criminal today. I just come back from the gym, and again, they got right there on the TV screen all about still mourning this criminal, this drug smuggler. They don't tell you anything about the horrible things this man and his family have committed, but that's and they keep it on. They keep it on like they push it in your face. Now, I don't watch it at home. I'm probably going to get rid of my cable very soon. But you can't help it. You go to a place like, you go to the gym, I go to the workout stuff, then I go to do my aerobic workout after my after my weights, and then that's when they have those TVs on, and I got to watch this garbage. Yeah. Terrible.
Well, listen, Mark, we got to take a break for station identification. Don't hang up. I'm going to hold you over into hour number 2. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2 here, and the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And before we go back to Mark in North Carolina, one of the things I like about my bank is they have a big TV there where you're waiting to get to a teller. They've got it on the cooking channel. I guess they all got sick and tired of all the propaganda coming on out from it too. Corporate media, at least as far as I have the Fox channel on here to see what they're lying to us about today, and they're still going on about George Herbert Walker Bush. They're starting to sneak a little bit of news in, but yeah, they're laying it on there with a trowel. Anyway, Mark, there's a lot of saber rattling going on. There's no question about that. We're being groomed and prepped for a major war, a high-intensity war.
Yeah, I understand that, Mike, but, it's still hard for me to believe. Are these people totally insane? Now, I know Pompeo, I heard, is one of these Christian Zionists who believes that the end of the world is going to come, and only then can Jesus settle on his throne there in Jerusalem. By the way, I saw that movie you told me about yesterday. It was on I believe it was Showtime, about the Kingdom of Heaven. It was really good.
Yes, it is.
That made I didn't say it. If he really said it, of course. But this clown actually believes that he's this act, and I believe Pence also believes this. And you got madmen like this believing this stuff, and I believe the other clown there, Kushner, thinks that it's going to be some other kind of a what do you call it again? A Messiah, some Jewish Messiah that's going to come back and to rule from Jerusalem after the Armageddon. So you got these type of crazy people there in there that actually believe this kind of stuff, and the mix. And I'm really afraid. One situation, for instance, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, where you did have two rational men in both with Kennedy and Khrushchev, and now you don't have rational men anymore. Maybe Putin seems rational.
Yes.
But certainly Trump doesn't seem rational, and the people behind Trump are definitely not rational.
Well, that's the problem, because I don't think Trump's in control anymore. I think he's been reduced to basically being, a front man for what's going on behind him. And as I've said many times before, I think Trump's biggest single mistake coming into the White House was wanting to be magnanimous in victory and keep all these Obama holdovers. He should have just scraped it all out and brought all these new people in. But however they corralled and collared him, they've definitely done it. And it's unfortunate if you look over history, especially the last 17, it almost doesn't seem to matter who is in the White House. The war agenda keeps moving forward.
Yeah, it's the Bush holdovers, too, that he keeps putting in there, too. The very people that, couldn't stand him and actually wind up supporting Hillary. And he's got them in the White House with him. Bolton was part of it. First of all, he was part of that PNEC, and then he's actually the UN ambassador under Bush for a while.
Yep.
Couldn't even get him confirmed by Congress. But the guy, and these are the type of people that Trump is putting in. Now, he was warned by Roger Stone.
Yep.
Early on not to do this, but he either didn't get the information or whatever. And he just didn't listen. He's too stubborn to listen. He also, when he got rid of Michael Flynn, he said because he lied to Pence at the time, he shouldn't even been talking to Pence. He's Trump's national security advisor. He should have been doing what they had planned on doing. They had planned on working together and getting Russia, and the United States back, closer together again, and not and campaigning against the globalists. Instead, he leaves them out to dry. He honors what Pence says, who I think Pence is just waiting for his opportunity to become president.
Yes.
And then he gets rid of Flynn. He gave them just what they wanted, and now, sure enough, they're all coming aboard. Now he's got a guy like Bolton who's in there. He goes from bad to worse. He goes first McMaster, and then he goes to Bolton. So I mean, you can't get much worse than that. And he doesn't understand who the real patriots are. He thinks that even like Breitbart. Breitbart is another neocon network. They actually urged him to put Bolton in. They wanted Bolton for Secretary of State in the first place. They're not alternate or independent media. They're very similar to Fox News, the fake news network.
Well, they were when Andrew Breitbart was still there. But just like the Murdochs took over Fox News, it's shifting to the left. The more prominent independent media is being either acquired or regime changed to basically take the entire country toward that war agenda.
Fox News used to be totally different. I look sometimes on YouTube and I find these things about 9/11 when Fox News actually was doing an investigation about Israeli possible involvement in Israeli spying, the Mossad spying on Americans, and they're the ones who also brought the thing up about the dancing Israelis. And then the stuff all disappeared. It didn't disappear from YouTube because people keep bringing it back up, but as if it never happened. That guy Carl Cameron, I believe his name is.
Yes, that was his name.
He was really doing a fierce investigation of that. So it wasn't that they were playing into the Zionist hands at the time. This happened, but shortly after that, they seemed to have become nothing but a mouthpiece for the globalist, Zionist, bankster, Wall Street cabal.
Yep.
That's so. It just doesn't seem. I just don't know what we're going to do. Like I'm starting to get to the point where I'm really concerned that that this planet may go up in smoke, in nuclear smoke.
Well, that's the worst case scenario, but we're definitely going to be looking at, I think we're on the verge of moving from the low intensity wars we've been seeing for the last 17 years to a high intensity war. They're going to need something to happen to kick it off. I don't think the incident at the Kerch Strait is going to be sufficient, but everybody needs to basically be prepared because if there is a high intensity war, it's going to be the same as a natural disaster. You're going to lose the electricity, phone lines, access to running water. So same thing that you would do if you lived in an earthquake zone or a hurricane zone or a tsunami zone. Storable food, water, extra medications, and so forth, to basically hunker on down and try and ride it out. And it's frightening to look at, but I think we have to be honest and realize that's the direction we're all being taken by our government.
In some ways, I almost hope we have it. Clyde, stop it. I'm sorry, it's my dog acting up there. One of my dogs. I think a draft wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, because I think that would, these millennials and Generation Z's, they're not going to go along with this. You think what's going on in Paris, the riots they're having in France right now,
yep,
with the yellow vests, that'd make it look like a garden picnic or something like that. Because I really don't think, I think you would have out-and-out draft riots if that would happen, because these people are, the younger people for the most part are a lot more well-versed on the real news. They don't get their news from the fake news networks. They get it off of the net. They find various news, and you look at the comments sometimes. I mean, wow, nobody buys this stuff. Nobody believes 9/11 the way the government story. Okay, it just doesn't happen there, and that's where most of this stuff's got. It's mostly the older people our age, that watch this garbage news. I don't. The funny thing with my sons are both millenniums, but yet they listen to the garbage news and criticize me, say I'm a conspiracy theorist for listening to the real news or the independent media. But that's unusual. Usually it's the opposite. Usually it's the old man and the old woman that listens to or watches Fox News or Crap News Network or something like that, and it's the younger people that listen to the real news. So with me, it's kind of reversed.
Well, if you look at the actual viewership numbers of the corporate news media, they're not doing very well at all. And so I would say that probably there's a much broader demographic of the population that is plugged into the independent media, which is why they're trying to figure out some way to censor it, control it, shut it down. They're having all the social media platforms install all these filters, and I imagine it won't be too long before somebody attempting to put up anything on YouTube about 9/11, it'll be immediately taken down because they're trying to regain control of the narrative.
I think they like to do it now. Now, you know more about computers, about the operation of the computers than I do. But I believe they're trying to do it now. But somehow people are able to post this stuff anyway. It gets past the censors, and it goes on anyway. Like you can see Infowars on there quite a bit now. Again, you'll find David Duke on there. I know they don't want Duke on there. They'll find all kinds of people that they don't want, and they're finding their way onto YouTube anyway. So I don't think they can stop them. And the other thing is, we've got BitChute coming up now. More and more people are turning up BitChute. I just signed up with Gab. I have to do it a second time now since they tried to get them off the air and they signed up. They got another server, so I got to sign up again with Gab now. Hopefully everything's all right with my password. But people are not going to let them silence us. The only way they're going to try to really silence us is if they really come down and try to do it forcibly. When they do it forcibly, you're going to have a civil war. Just like if they forcibly try to take a gun, you're going to have a civil war in this country. And again, maybe that's better than a nuclear war. It is better than a nuclear war, obviously.
Well,
horrible as would be, not as bad as the nuclear war,
Right now, the best thing that could happen for the world as a whole is for a major economic collapse in the United States. Because if there's no money, the war machine stops. And I know that would be a terrible amount of suffering for the American people to have to go through. But I think that would be a more desirable outcome than a high-intensity war with the potential to go nuclear. And let's be honest, once you get into a war between the United States, Russia, and China, the first side that decides it's losing, they will resort to the nuclear weapons.
That's what I'm concerned about. Exactly. And I believe we will get the worst of it in an exchange, especially let's say that the war starts on the Eastern European border, let's say Ukraine, Georgia, somewhere like that. Russians would destroy us because that's their territory. They're motivated. They've got all the logistics going. They could get the troops where they needed very quick. And they got history on their side, too,
Yes.
When you look at Napoleon and Hitler. I think U.S. and NATO forces would be destroyed. It probably wouldn't even take more than a couple of days. I don't even think it'll last a couple of days. Question is, what would happen after that? Okay, with these madmen in this country who run this country right now, the neocons, would they lick their chops and say, all right, looks like we can't do it? Or would they think, well, you know what, we can first strike Russia now with nukes and destroy them once and for all, and try it. And that's, of course, that'd probably be the end of the planet Earth if they tried that. So I don't know what you think of what would happen at that point, but unfortunately, that's something we really got to look at. No?
Yeah, it is. It's time to face up that this is a very real possibility. And, I know a lot of people are in denial about what's going on, but fewer and fewer. And people, I think, are very, very concerned.
Well, they have reason to be concerned, Mike. Hey, Mike, I just want to ask you one question. talking about survival and all that. I got a creek running through my, through where I live.
Yep.
Runs through not only my place, runs through a bunch of places. Is there something like a purifier I could get that if worst came to worst, I wasn't able to get, that I could get my water out of that creek safely, because I wouldn't drink out of it now,
Yes. Oh, there's all kinds of filters. There's all kinds of wonderful filters. I mean, there are filter systems out there, and they're not cheap. You could pour raw sewage into the top and get drinkable water out the bottom. So you need to find your nearest survivalist store and go talk to them. I don't remember off the top of my head the name of that filter I just described to you. It goes for about $200.
I'm not talking about a filter that you hook up to your own water supply. I'm talking about a filter that, like I said, you can use a portable type filter, like you could use from creek to get water from a creek.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, no, this thing's basically it's two buckets that rest one on top of the other, and they've got handles so you can just carry them. But again, find a survival store. I'm sorry?
Yeah. I'm saying I got that. I'm good. There is a survival store right close to me too. There's a couple of them, as a matter of fact. And like I said, I'm ready as far as ammunition. I got and other things I need. I have dry food. I'm ready as far as that goes. I'm prepared. I'm in a strategic area where it wouldn't be easy for mobs to come trampling down and try to overwhelm us. There's a survival camp. Talk about survival. There's about a half a mile from me. You hear the AR-15s and the AK-47s go up all the time. And people who like move from, got a couple of neighbors that moved here from the east, from the northeast, and they say, they're scared by it. I said, no, that's the sound of liberty and freedom when you hear that.
Yep. That's a very New England attitude.
Yeah. So you're part of New England, not Massachusetts, So I know in New Hampshire, even Vermont, surprisingly, they're as liberal as they are. They're also very independent-minded.
Oh yes, absolutely.
They got some of the best gun law.
Absolutely,
because there is no gun law there.
Okay, well,
all right, Mike.
Yeah, Mark, I'm going to let you go. We've got callers waiting on the line. I want to do a shout-out to our honor affiliates who are rejoining the network. And let's switch over to Don from the Philippines. Don, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yes, I think the previous caller said something to the effect that Pence was a bad choice when he picked Pence. I think he said that. But you got to remember that Trump beat all the Republican challengers. He beat them all in the primaries. There's no doubt about it. He was the winner of going into the convention. But still, there was a big effort underway that they were trying to not let him have the nomination, even though he'd won. So he had to make some kind of a deal, and that's how he got Pence. He made some kind of a deal with the rhinos there. Yep. Big bad news guy, and that's the reason he got a lot of his bad appointments originally.
Yes.
So he had no choice on that, and he has had to compromise. I mean, otherwise he could have picked Michael Rivero as Vice President Alex Jones as Secretary of Defense or whatever.
Oh no, I wanted head of NASA.
That wouldn't have made it.
I wanted head of NASA.
Well, I guess you could have held out for head of NASA then.
Yes.
But the thing is, Trump is in a possible situation. That's why I really don't think he's going to run again anymore. He just can't win. He can't win. He tried to. The reason he appointed all these West Point graduates or all these military bigwigs like Flynn. Originally, he had Flynn, Mattis, Kelly, and he had McMaster. He had all these 3-star officers.
Yes.
And I think that was the reason he did that is so he wouldn't get killed by the military for his own protection. I think that's the main reason he probably did that. And then of course you had Sheldon Adelson, who was his major funder for his campaign. Sheldon Adelson was in there pushing a lot of individuals on him. So yeah, Trump had a lot of favors he had to pay back, and basically, as I said before, I don't think Trump is really in control anymore.
I think he's out there. He's tweeting like crazy. He's making speeches. He's going to rallies, and he's talking tough. And he's had a chance to fly around the world and meet the other world leaders. But I don't think he's really calling the shots anymore. It just doesn't feel like it to me. Anyway, Don, we got to take a break for commercials, so we're going to let you go here, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. So getting on back to the international news, the riots in France have been all over the news. Cars are being burned. A lot of vandalism, historic places being destroyed. I mean, it really is out of control. And supposedly this whole thing started in reaction to an increase in fuel prices, but it's turned into something worse. And this appears to be a genuine grassroots uprising. And I think it may lead to the downfall of the French government. And we already know that the yellow vests have spread to Belgium and the Netherlands. And we could easily see the beginning of the dissolution of the European Union. Because you can only oppress a people so far. And then they just reach that breaking point. And Macron could come down hard on the protesters. He could call out the military and resort to violence. That might make things worse. And this may even be the end of the Paris Climate Accord, because this gas tax was supposedly to fight human-caused global warming. And that may be coming apart. And I'm not the only person who's looking at what's going on here. Europe is starting to unravel before our eyes, and it didn't just start with the French riots. We've been seeing it with all the friction from the open borders issue. We've been seeing it with all the economic distress caused by the predations of the European Central Bank. And I think we're seeing a resurgence of nationalism. And I think that's a good thing, because if you look at what happens where the globalists have made gains, like the EU, you realize that this one world government, new world order, is not going to be a very pleasant place to be for those who are not sitting on top. Anyway, earlier in the show, I was talking about how Syria had gone on alert out of concerns of Israeli warplanes flying along the Syria-Lebanon border. But it turns out Israel has launched an operation which they claim will expose and neutralize tunnels between Lebanon and Israel, allegedly dug by Hezbollah. And Israeli military spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus told Reuters the operation would only take place on Israel's side of the border. They would not extend into Lebanon. Now, Lebanon is saying that Israel has offered no proof there are such tunnels. And the UN peacekeeping mission is saying they will send a team to Israel to ascertain the facts. And they're calling for access to all locations along the border. Now, we know that Israel wants an excuse to go back into Lebanon. They want that Litani River. They got really close last time, within 20 miles. They don't want to give on up. Anyway, Hezbollah itself is now on alert and saying they are ready for actual attacks by Israel. And they're saying Hezbollah cannot allow the Israeli occupation to single out any of the resistance fronts. Basically, Hezbollah is saying, if you dare attack, you will regret it, which is very, very tough talk. Now, surprisingly, Uruguay has come on out affirming support for Palestinians' rights. Uruguay's Vice President Lucia Topolansky has affirmed her country's support for Palestinian people's rights and the importance of cooperation in various fields. And this statement was made during a meeting with the Palestinian ambassador Walid Abdel Rahim. And Ambassador Rahim stressed the Palestinian people appreciate Uruguay's support for their right to self-determination and to have an independent state in East Jerusalem, with East Jerusalem as the capital, based on the 1967 borders. Okay. We're going to start a phone call here with Dennis in Indiana, but Dennis, I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Oh, I was just on a comment on a program I watched. The lungs of the world is basically the Brazilian tropical rainforest out in South America. And that guy that was he was a preacher on TV. He was saying that they're taking down and destroying 150 acres per minute down there.
Oh yes,
and that's why we are losing. Yes.
Well,
that is one of the reasons why
the Amazon rainforest has been a major supplier of planetary oxygen, but a lot of it also comes from the ocean, from plankton. Anyway, listen, Dennis, stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Dennis in Indiana, and we're talking about the Paris Climate Accord, which may be in trouble. And Dennis was making a comment. He saw a show the other day talking about the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest and the potential impact it could have on the amount of oxygen there is in the atmosphere. But as I pointed out to him, it's not just the Amazonian rainforest. We get a lot of oxygen coming out of ocean water from plankton. And the solution is really easy, and that's we simply plant more green plants around the world, which also would have the added benefit of lowering atmospheric carbon dioxide and getting Al Gore to shut the heck up.
Yeah, I think that would help. But, also I saw on a program where our country, and I don't know how they dispose of chemicals and enriched plutonium and enriched spent uranium, and that waste management through the Sicilians were supposed to take care of disposing of it properly. But they had actually dumped it in the Mediterranean Sea and out in the Pacific Ocean.
Yes.
And along with Fukushima, the radiation, that's going up into the clouds too. And that is part of the reason why we're not, getting the protection from the clouds and our atmosphere, the ozone too.
Well, I think you're conflating a couple of different operational theories there. But yeah, disposal of nuclear waste has always been a problem. It's one of the reasons why people are saying we should look at thorium cycle reactors, which have much less waste to deal with. But our government likes uranium fission reactors because they get bomb stuff out of them. Anyway, Dennis, we're going to let you go here. I'm going to get back to the news. Thank you very much for the phone call.
Okay.
So
appreciate it and have a great day.
All right, same to you. All right, so we're talking about international news. We're talking about Israel. We're talking about Palestine. And there are still repercussions floating around over CNN's firing of Mark Lamont Hill. Now, he's this Temple University professor of media studies and urban education, used to be a regular political commentator on CNN. And he was fired for what he said in a speech at the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. He didn't say this on the air. He said it at a speech, basically at a conference for the Palestinian people. And the Israelis just jumped all over him, and they demanded CNN fire him, which CNN did. Now they're trying to get him fired from Temple University. And even worse, apparently the media has, shall we say, distorted things he said in the speech, claiming that he was anti-Semitic, that he was in favor of killing Jewish people. Just a classic media smear job. Okay, we're going to take another phone call. This is from Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. It's funny they'll let liberals say whatever they want, but when the minute they start talking about Israel and stuff, they get the boot. But
it's not just liberals. If liberals criticize Israel, they're gone.
Yeah, no, they are gone, and it just kind of shows, like, what's that quote? To know who rules over you, see who you can't criticize, right?
Absolutely.
With Voltaire. But
well, it's misattributed.
I was watching the Bush.
It's misattributed. Voltaire didn't say it, and off the top of my head, I don't remember who did. But it's a good quote, regardless of who said it.
Well, I read it on the internet, on Facebook. It's got to be true.
Well, you got to be a little careful about what you read on the internet,
Yeah, no, I know, but it is a good quote. I'm a sucker for these kind of ceremonies, and I watched the Bush ceremony today, and I'm a 9/11 truther. I think that he had part of killing Kennedy, but I am a sucker for this kind of stuff, just the pomp and ceremony. And the vibe I really got from it was what an end of an era this is.
Yes.
Seeing Bob Dole at the end. Really, it's the end of the World War II generation. It's the end of the Christian West. To me, the patriarchy, as the left and the feminists like to call it. I mean, watch it. If you watch like the ceremonies and stuff, it's all white people. They brought up Jesus' name. It was just odd that I know what Bush is. He's probably the highest level Illuminati in the country.
The Obamas were there, so I would hesitate to say that it was all white.
Yeah, no, well, what we don't know about him. He's half white anyway, but Michelle, I don't know. I don't even know if she's a female, to tell you the truth.
Oh, come on. That's one of those things that you read on the internet that you need to be really skeptical about.
Yeah, there's just some fishy stuff, like with Joan Rivers. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but I like looking into everything, and I give it, like, percentages. So to me, it's like 25% chance.
Joe,
so
we have a rule here at the What Really Happened radio show. Okay, the families are off limits. We criticize Obama's policies or Trump's policies or anything. We don't take shots at the spouses or the children unless, of course, the spouses actually do something that warrants some attention. But other than that, it's off limits.
Like the mafia, I can go with that.
Well,
that's like gangsters.
Thank you. I think
the other thing is interesting. The other thing that was interesting was watching the Clintons, and Hillary never looked at Trump at all, pretended like he didn't exist. But I got to say, after all that ceremony and stuff, my odds to me of Trump going after Hillary are zero now.
Yep.
There's no way he can do it. The country just wouldn't tolerate the whole lock her up stuff. I mean, when you see a ceremony like this, you're like, there's just part of an elite club. They're untouchables. They're at a level, a former president, former first lady, to everybody that hopes she gets locked up. And I mean, she's a criminal.
Yes.
But I just look at it like it's not going to happen. But hopefully they'll go after all the people that enabled her. That's the only thing that we can really hope for. But they are not going to put her in jail. It's just, like I said, you can get if you watch the ceremony, it's incredible. And that I got to say, the country, it really just struck me as, oh my God, it's like maybe it's just that I'm old too, but our way of life is over now. It's going to be a complete different country. Just watch the funeral.
It already is. It already is. This is not the country that I grew up in, spent my childhood in, and I didn't watch the funeral because, to be blunt, I've been to too many funerals this year already, live and in person. And so I'm not really interested in seeing another one, even in the spirit of Hemingway's Revenge. But as far as the Clintons, or for that matter, any other corrupt politician, of which there are many, no, the government's not going to police itself. But we hope that private organizations like Freedom Watch and Judicial Watch are basically going to force the issue into the public eye. But supposedly this report on the investigation into the Clinton Foundation has been rescheduled for the 13th of this month. And I think what that report will really tell us is just how all-encompassing the deep state is. because if the report honestly exposes what the Clinton Foundation has been doing, well, that's going to be a good thing. But if they come on in and they pull a James Comey that, hey, they didn't mean to do wrong, so let them off the hook, then we'll know that this government really is too corrupt to ever be recoverable.
Well, to me, it's kind of like, I hope it puts an end to any kind of chance of Hillary ever be. I mean, I doubt, and I don't think there's a snowball's chance she's going to be put to prison as a former first lady. But if her political career can totally be ruined forever, I think that's a great thing for the country. It's great for the Democrats more than anybody. Just put it, So to me, that's like the most important thing about it. Like I said, it's not going to happen. She's not going to jail. And once again, I'd love to see her enablers go to jail and lose their jobs. All those FBI people be put away.
Well, I think if you look at the Clintons' little speaking tour that they're in the middle of right now, they're basically playing to mostly empty rooms. The ticket prices, remember when they started out, it was going to be $700 and you get to meet the Clintons, or $177 if you don't want to meet the Clintons. And apparently the ticket prices have just crashed into single digits. In fact, we had a story, I think it was just yesterday, where the parking at the venue was more expensive than the ticket to see the Clintons. And I think that's going to tell Hillary that her support base is gone, that the people are not going to be out there looking to support her in 2020.
Well, and I mean, the fact of the matter, though, is we live in such a world where the media can produce what they want as far as, a movement. Look at John McCain and how they nominated him. I mean, he was done, and all of a sudden 6 newspapers endorsed him, and Lieberman or whatever. Next thing you know, he gets the Republican Party nomination. And it was the same with Bob Dole. I mean, Pat Buchanan should have won, and all of a sudden, so I never can say that she's finished. I mean, it seems that way, but it's such a corrupt system, and the way they can just use their power with the media and get the public perception going, it's kind of scary. I mean, if you look at what's going on now, and I feel like I live in a different world than everybody else, to tell you the truth. If you're watching mainstream media, you're in a different world than me. Our reality is
you're
totally
in the Matrix.
different than one of ours.
If you're watching corporate media, you're living in the Matrix.
Yeah, so it's kind of sad. It's like half my family I can't talk to anymore. They just, and all we talk about, you can't even talk about the weather anymore because climate change comes up, So
Yep.
It's kind of sad, but you try to give them a dose of reality and it blows their mind. They get all angry. So it's kind of like, it's a sad situation. And in that regard, with Hillary, you never know. I mean, the system is so weird. That,
okay.
I would ask you a question. I heard Kellyanne.
Let me ask you a question. Have you heard, probably you have, cases of abused spouses or children who, even though they're being abused, will defend the abusing parent or the abusing partner? And it's a well-known psychological. Yeah, it's a well-known psychological. That's a lot of what's going on here. I think Americans do understand they're in the grip of an abusing government, but they don't want to say anything about it out of fear the abuse might get worse.
Well, part of it, Mike, is that you get rewarded by going along with the lies in this world, it seems.
Yes,
I mean, everybody
that's true.
that I know that's a big truth teller. They have trouble at work. A lot of times they have trouble in their marriage. They have financial issues because you don't want to go along with a corrupt financial system. So it seems like the more diluted you are, the more you go along with the lies and the general perceptions that are given to you by the media and the government, the better off you do. So I think some of it's that. I mean, some people just like the lie, I like the story the way it is, as somebody told me once.
Yep.
And they're living in their bubble, but they're doing better than me.
Yeah, it's called get along by going along.
Yeah. Anyway, the system takes care of its own, that's for sure. But anyway, it's nice talking to you again. I haven't talked to you in a while. I like your show a lot.
Thank you very much.
Keep up the good work.
I will just as long as I can, and we're going to let you go here. Thank you for the phone call. Okay, we're still talking about Israel And as you know, there is this temporary stopgap funding bill that is going to get pushed through Congress because the final budget, like everything else in Washington, D.C., has been delayed by the events surrounding the death of former President Bush. And as is usual, there's skullduggery afoot, because apparently members of the Congress are trying to slip a rider onto this emergency spending bill that will basically say it's illegal to boycott Israel. It's an anti-BDS movement. They're calling it the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. And they've tried it before, and it's been shelved because of concerns about the very obvious limit of free speech. And civil liberties groups argued the original version would have allowed criminal penalties for Americans who participate in a political boycott of Israel. Now, oddly enough, a lot of people don't know this. There is already a law saying that American businesses cannot boycott Israel. But that didn't apply to individuals. This is the one they're trying to run through right now. This is going to go all the way to the Supreme Court because, yes, it's obviously a violation of the First Amendment. And it's shameful to see these senators willing to basically abandon one of the founding principles of our nation to placate their Israeli masters. Now, Peter King, a member of Congress for New York, is trying to arm twist Ireland regarding Ireland's plan to ban imports from Israel's illegal settlements. Gee, Peter, don't you have work to do a little closer to home? And King has tried to convince Fianna Fáil, one of Ireland's largest political parties, to withdraw its support for the proposed ban. So, once again, who does Congress work for? Sure as heck isn't the American people. Now, John Bolton is saying that the North Korean failure to meet their commitments requires a second Trump-Kim summit. That maybe they'll go through the process again and it will look really good and North Korea will be motivated to basically do as they're told. Where this is all falling down is that the United States has adopted an approach to foreign policy negotiations similar to that used by Israel. You give us everything we want first, and then we'll decide what nice things we're going to do for you. And that doesn't really work very well, especially with the Asian mindset. Now, the fact of the matter is Kim Jong-un did meet some of his commitments. He shut down the nuclear test site. He tore down that missile test stand. He returned the remains of those U.S. soldiers who were killed at the start of the Korean War. And now he's waiting for the United States to do something, like lower some of the sanctions or maybe call off all of those continuous drills off the coast. The United States hasn't done any of those. And Bolton is out there basically saying that North Korea has to do everything the United States demands first before the sanctions will be lifted. All right, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call now from Layla in Ontario. Aloha, Layla. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Yes, it's the idea of anyone being untouchable and totally aloof from accountability. I refer to King James I, who was beheaded, and he offended his subjects by marrying a Catholic princess. His Protestant subjects took offense. King Charles dissolved Parliament. However, Parliament was led by Oliver Cromwell, yes. And Oliver Cromwell had So ultimately, King Charles was put on trial, and he was executed with his head chopped off.
Yes.
So nobody at any time is actually above accountability, and that includes Queen Hillary. So Just wanted to make that observation.
You raise a valid point there, and I mean, we've seen it throughout history. Ceausescu, Mussolini, and all those ancient Celtic kings who keep bobbing up in those peat bogs all over Europe. You're right. Every once in a while, somebody will make that mistake of thinking they're above reproach. Louis XVI, another good example. But
yes.
Yeah, these are methods that involve a certain amount of violence, which I tend to, wish to avoid. I want to see a restoration of the justice process in this country. But again, as I said, I think the entire federal government is just too corrupt to be recovered, to be redeemed.
I agree, and I think it's not just the U.S., it's everywhere. And a lot of that is the fault of the subjects, the citizens who have failed to do their share of to perform their share of the obligations to keep their themselves informed and their leaders accountable. So perhaps we have indeed brought this on ourselves. But I just wanted to make one more comment about Trump.
Before you do that, for a lot of people watching that TV news screen, they think is keeping themselves fully informed. So it's not like there's a crime of omission there at all.
Well, actually, I mean, that's the reason I left the industry 30 years ago, just as I was about to make a lot of money, because I realized that I didn't want to participate in a fraud. So people long before that were already failing to do their duties and be informed of keeping their countries actually free and honorable. But in terms of Trump, I don't think he was ever really in charge. I think he was just hungry to be president, made whatever deals were necessary, and has lied to everybody that supported him.
Okay,
that's
Layla?
my observation now.
All right, Layla, we got to take a break for station identification. Stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking with Layla in Ontario and basically talking about how it is that societies degenerate into tyranny and propaganda. And Layla, you're right. I'm sure that every government on earth is corrupt to a certain degree. But I think right now, the Olympic gold medal for corruption definitely goes to Washington, D.C. And even Thomas Jefferson, when he was setting this place up, he knew that the curse of political power is that it attracts the very people who should not be allowed to have it. And that's why he tried to craft this system of checks and balances and serious limitations on individual power and authority to try and keep the country focused on doing what was best for the American people. But even he predicted it was only going to last 100 years, and at that point, the American people were going to have to tear it all down again and start over.
And it's not necessarily the country that needs to fall apart or be disintegrated. It's the government that needs to be brought down. Now, if the people, and it may be happening in Britain for all we know, as it stands now, it looks as though Theresa May is going to lose the vote on Tuesday and probably call for a second Brexit vote. And if that happens, there's going to be a great deal of discontent, and they're talking about the possibility of a general election before Christmas. Things are not looking good there, but the same thing possibly in a different kind of way, of course, because of the different systems, but maybe happening in the U.S. Somehow people have got to be satisfied that the government that they are observing and paying taxes to is not betraying them. They've got to have faith in them. And Trump certainly has not inspired trust or faith. And I think although we all gave him the benefit of the doubt in the beginning, I think we now have to look back and ask if he ever really intended to be serving the people, or whether a lot of his performances were merely performances. and that his reality TV show was merely practice for when he would become president, because it was decades before. I remember seeing an interview with a woman, and some woman, I can't remember, Rona something or other, asking him in the early 80s, if he wanted to be president. Well, yes, of course he did, although he didn't acknowledge it fully. He somewhat did. So it's always been there in his mind, and he's been working towards it. So he certainly has disappointed a lot of people.
Yes.
In my case, I learned to love the U.S. I think the happiest days of my life are the days that I spent in the U.S. And while I was there, I felt that I was part of something greater than anything else that I had experienced or could have experienced. And it's very heartbreaking for me, because I want so much to be able to come back to the U.S., but cannot until things settle down. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to make one more observation about journalism.
Okay.
We talk as though journalism has only failed us lately. At the national level, the networks always were treacherous to the people below. In the U.S., not in Canada, but in the U.S., local TV news or local news in any medium was always very accountable to the people, because they actually depended upon viewership and ratings in order to be able to meet their payroll and make their profits.
True.
Having a TV station used to be called a license to print money because of the TV news revenue. Since the decline of local TV news, we have had this drastic event where we're now controlled by the talking heads of the major networks. But that is really not anything new. I remember, everyone has heard of Kim Philby.
Yes.
You no doubt know who he was.
Yes.
He was a journalist in Austria at the time that he was being recruited by a Jewish communist woman in Vienna. He married her in order to get her out of there. The reason I'm so well aware is because I knew that the Chancellor of Austria had been assassinated, a very honorable man, a man who was never talked about, Engelbert Dollfuss.
Yes.
And he was assassinated while Kim Philby was there, and the communists and the Nazis each wanted to have him assassinated, because he stood in the way of either one of them taking control of Austria, because Germany wanted to prepare for the Anschluss, of which it finally did succeed in doing in 1938 because of the assassination of Dollfuss. But ever since then, I mean, Kim Philby ended up being the head of British intelligence.
Yes.
He worked in Cairo. And the other thing we have to keep in mind, too, is while we malign Joe McCarthy, it turns out if we look at things honestly, he was right. I mean, a lot of the people that he fingered, that he was investigating, really were communist agents. One of them being Lester Pearson, who became Prime Minister of Canada, but at the time he was the attaché to the Canadian embassy or consulate in D.C., in Washington, D.C., and he was working for Elizabeth Bentley, who was called the Red Spy Queen in the U.S., and she said that Pearson knew what he was doing. There was a whole scandal here in Canada with communists, but, you know, Joe McCarthy was right. Now, Mueller is doing the opposite, and people compare him with Joe McCarthy. That's not accurate, because he's the polar opposite.
Well,
but anyway, it's all...
the reason people criticize Joe McCarthy is not really the question about whether he was right or wrong, but how he went about doing it. Just basically, he didn't build a case for espionage against any of these people. He simply denounced them as commies and then sought to ruin their lives, rather, until Edward R. Murrow called him out on it, because a lot of innocent people had their lives ruined. And by the way, back then, it wasn't that big a deal being a communist. There was a Communist Party of the United States of America. It was fully legal. and a lot of people would get together and talk about the principles of communism, but it didn't necessarily mean they were in positions to subvert the government in any way. So had McCarthy not been quite so reckless and grandstanding in his approach, he probably would have been judged a lot more gently by history.
Like any crusader, he may have been too harsh and rushed forward, but Edward R. Murrow, if one looks back now, if you can still find the information, was himself constantly defending communism and was suspected of being a communist. He was also the lover of the daughter-in-law of Winston Churchill,
yes,
Pamela Churchill, and she was working as a courtesan, as a spy for Randolph. She had affairs with a lot of Americans in order to bring the Americans into the war,
yes,
on for Britain's side. And then she ended up being the one who built Bill Clinton. In fact, when she died, Bill Clinton fought with the French president to bring back her body so she could get a royal, the equivalent of a royal burial in the U.S. Pamela Churchill was, and anyway, she was in love with Edward R. Murrow, and they were supposed to get married, but Murrow declined. His wife wouldn't give him a divorce, so he didn't marry her.
Yes.
But he himself was under suspicion.
Layla, we're kind of wandering all over the territory here,
agree.
And a lot of people are very impressed with the breadth of your knowledge. But can you come to a conclusion?
What I'm saying is that the destruction of our media is not new. It's always been there, going back so far that we don't really know. Leadership is always going to be held accountable eventually. Those are the two things that I take away from what's going on now. And with regard to Trump himself, I don't think he was ever really in charge, and I don't think he knew how to take charge. And we did have other choices. We only had two candidates who won the primaries, but there were others in the Republican primary who could have been a better alternative to Trump. But hindsight is 2020. So those are the three primary conclusions. But basically, it all boils down to one thing. As you yourself have said, none of this is new. It has all happened before.
Yeah,
and that's the tragic part. We keep repeating ourselves.
Yeah, we do.
Thanks, Mike.
We do. All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network here. And what you need to remember, though, is that prior to the 50s, 60s, yes, a lot of the larger media was very much on board with the Cold War propaganda, but there was a diversity of media that was coded into law. No one corporation could own too much of the media. Now, the 1950s was just after World War II when the CIA had launched Operation Mockingbird to take control over the media. Because prior to World War II, all of these media were small-town newspapers or even big city newspapers, but they all had individual owners, and that preserved a diversity of opinion. And prior to the first Iraq War, the U.S. government went to the largest of the corporate media outlets and said, we'll make you a deal. Okay, you will embed your journalists with our troops. You will report the war the way we tell you to, and in exchange, we will strike down those laws that limit how much media you can own. And the deal was done. The first Iraq War was propagandized into us with that stolen incubator story, for one example here. And shortly after that, we began to see this period of intense media consolidation, which has led us to the situation we're in today, where pretty much everything that you see, read, or hear goes through just a handful of corporate boards, most of which also have interests in, for example, defense contractors, which is why people are turning to the independent media. Okay, getting on back to domestic politics here. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley is accusing the Fusion GPS founder of giving extremely misleading testimony. And he's drawing parallels between the false testimony that Michael Cohen gave to Congress in 2017 and the statements made by the founder of the firm that commissioned the infamous Steele dossier. And Grassley basically wrote a letter to Connecticut Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal saying that he hoped the Justice Department is handling all of these instances of false statements to Congress with the same level of seriousness they treated Mr. Cohen's. Probably not going to happen. And again, that Steele dossier that links right into Spygate, and clearly a dirty tricks campaign by the Democrats back in 2016. It really is worse than Watergate. Okay. Now, Robert Mueller finally released his sentencing memo regarding Michael Flynn, heavily redacted. In fact, about the only thing it really said is that Mueller said no prison time for Flynn, but senior government leaders should be held to the highest standard, at which point there was a Twitter explosion of laughter and derision. Okay. Porn lawyer Michael Avenatti is back in the news. As you know, yesterday he officially pulled out of the 2020 campaign. And Stormy Daniels has come on out and stated Avenatti launched a site to raise money for her defense, which pays him without her permission. And this funding campaign raised about $600,000. She has no idea what happened to that money. And Crowd Justice said it is now investigating what Avenatti did, and they're investigating another fundraising site he created to help families at the Mexican border, which raised $159,000. And he claimed this was a campaign on behalf of a group of detained mothers and children, but there's absolutely nothing that specifies the names of the beneficiaries for whom the money is being raised. He's a lawyer, you know. Now, Donald Trump wants to terminate the current Nafta agreement. A lot of people are probably going to agree with that. But he wants to replace it with a new agreement, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which is the UN Agenda 2030 in disguise. And the USMCA, like NAFTA, stifles free trade, it overrides national sovereignty, and increases the power of the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. And the document obligates the U.S. to follow UN Agenda 2030 and rule by unelected bureaucrats. Ron Paul is signaling a warning that this new United States-Mexico-Canada agreement actually increases government control. And it entangles all three countries in environmental standards and monetary policy. And even worse, there is a provision in this agreement that grants legal immunity for these tech giants. Basically, it allows them to engage in censorship. And you can't do anything about it. Alrighty, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez basically tweeted out that the Pentagon lost $21 trillion and that would be enough to fund most of her Medicare for All scheme. Well, there's a couple of problems. It is true that there seems to be $21 trillion missing, but that's from the entire government. We don't actually know what's coming out from the how much the Pentagon has lost, because according to the accountants, the records are a complete mess. But Alexandria is still pushing this Medicare for All, which is this socialized medicine single-payer system. In other words, you basically get the same health care that you would get at the Veterans Administration. Now, Alexandria is refusing to retract that claim of the Pentagon losing $21 trillion. And right now, she's in a bit of a jam because she campaigned on just giving away a lot of free stuff. And she's been put on the spot several times by the media saying, how are you going to pay for it? And her reply continues to be, we'll just pay for it. We'll just pay for it. I guess she thinks she's just going to go over to the money tree and give it a good shake. It's amazing. As you know, there was a very rough day on the stock markets yesterday. And one of the reasons that Trump may have decided to declare today a federal holiday was to close down the markets and give everybody a chance to relax and get back from the edge of panic. Whether that will work or not, we don't know. But according to this article in Zero Hedge, 2018 is starting to look historic, and this is the worst market since Nixon's administration. So I'm sure that even though Wall Street is officially closed, a lot of analysts are sitting there trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Now, getting back to Ocasio-Cortez and her comment, $21 trillion. That is the official U.S. national debt. Actually, it's a little more than that. It's going up. Basically, it goes up $3 billion per day. Now, you think about that. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy, and before the commercial break, teased into this story about how the current U.S. national debt is $21 trillion, and it's increasing over $3 billion with a B every single day. Now, the U.S. government pays the interest by issuing new debt, but that new debt increases the total debt and eventually drives up the interest rates, which requires more borrowing to pay the annual interest payments. Within another couple of years, the U.S. government will be spending more to pay the interest on the national debt than it spends on the military, and there'll be precious little left over to actually take care of the country. Now, we can see where this is going. When the debt load becomes too heavy, it's all going to come crashing down. It's a mathematical inevitability. So, now, I'm going to take a short break here and get back to the French riots, because apparently Macron is using what are called GLI-4 TNT grenades against the protesters. And this is a tear gas bomb that also contains an explosive charge of 25 grams of TNT. Now, France is the only European country to use these kinds of munitions. It can cause severe injury or even kill. It looks like the beginning of an all-out revolution, because this is not going to calm people down. This is absolutely not going to calm people down. Alrighty, getting on back to the economic news. Putin has initiated a trilateral summit with India and China. Apparently, they all got together on the sidelines of the G20, Buenos Aires, and they put together what's called the RIC format, which is Russia, India, and China. And they're looking at boosting commerce between them, and they're looking at using their own indigenous currencies. So Putin's out there making deals. Trump is making war. Putin's making deals. And bit by bit, countries that used to do business with us are starting to move away here. Now, Russia is already nudging the government of India that they should take their entire country away from the US dollar. So that's what this is really, really all about. Whose currency we're all enslaved to for the next 100 years. Of course, it's very hard to convince Mr. and Mrs. America that they should send their son or daughter into combat because the Federal Reserve doesn't want to give up the dominant currency position of the world. People are going to say, who cares? It's just ink and paper. But that's really what's behind all of this. Iraq was invaded over Saddam's selling of Iraq's oil for the euro instead of the dollar. Same thing with Gaddafi. This is all about dragging the world back to Bretton Woods and reliance on the US dollar globally, off of which the US economic system makes a small profit. Over in Turkey, they've got some problems over there. They've got massive out-of-control inflation. Their currency is plunging. Interest rates are surging. And their stock market looks an awful lot like ours did yesterday. And it's being described as a house of cards. Anyway, over in Greece, their gross domestic product growth is accompanied by weakening trade and falling investment. In other words, it's not going to continue to grow. Now, China is saying they're confident of a U.S. trade deal in 90 days, and Beijing says the two sides are moving forward with negotiations in the next 3 months. So China is saying they'll start with the implementation of the specific matters in which consensus has been reached. The sooner, the better. So we'll see what's going to happen there. But if the United States keeps provoking China in the Taiwan Straits and the South China Sea, things could go the other way. Now, early today, the CEO of General Motors had to testify before Congress about the coming mass layoffs and trying to keep the company afloat. But there's an interesting article that was over in Alternate saying basically General Motors is proof to the world that slashing wages is not the ticket to profitability. Actually, slashing our dependence on the Federal Reserve and its fiat currency loaned at interest would be a lot more profitable. In fact, if we were still on the economic system that this country was started with, there would be no $21 trillion unpayable national debt. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And let's get on back here. We're talking about the economic news. Bloomberg is saying that gold is coiled, which I guess means they expect it could take off very rapidly. And given what happened in the stock market yesterday, that's certainly quite possible. I'm sure a lot of people right now are looking at the stock market and thinking maybe getting into metals is going to be a good idea. But we've seen in the past that gold will be forecast to rise and something happens and it gets shoved back down again. Because we know that the equities markets and the banks don't want you going to gold. They want your money in their savings accounts or in their stock market. Because if it's not there, they can't play their games. So, anyway, according to this article over at Investment Watch blog, silver is at its most affordable in years. Now, that seems counterintuitive to me, because in theory, as the stock market gets nervous, demand for all the metals goes up. Gold, silver, tantalum, platinum. So we'll see. Okay. All right, we already talked about Qatar with a caller there. I think it could be the beginning of the dissolution of OPEC. And Qatar is claiming its exit has no political overtones. They're not saying exactly what's going on here, but it basically ends 57 years of membership. And he noted that the country's impact on the cartel's production decisions will be small, and stressed that Doha would continue to abide by its global commitments like any other non-OPEC oil producer. But as I mentioned before, the other members, nations of OPEC have become very disenchanted with Saudi Arabia. And they see Saudi Arabia's allowing of too much U.S. influence in the oil market and in the region as a whole. All of these nations took a hit during that poorly thought out attempt to wreck Russia's economy with an oil price war. And Russia's economy proved to be a lot more resilient than was estimated. And other countries took a hit. Saudi Arabia, one of the worst. They had to issue government bonds for the first time in like decades. Turning to our borders and immigration, Mattis has now okayed an extension of the military's border mission through the end of January. Now, yesterday, we had a report that the organizers of these migrant caravans seem to have given up and left. And so it may be starting to unwind at this point. But some of the migrants did get through the fence, and apparently over 400 of them are now under arrest. And apparently a lot of these people turned themselves in to the U.S. Border Patrol in El Paso, Texas. They're still hoping to get asylum, but who knows what's going to happen. And frankly, I think they should be sent home here. Democratic Representative Pramila Jayapal, who was born in India, is out there pushing for more work visas, saying CEOs must get millions of cheap visa workers. And right now, the number of visas is capped at 66,000, and she's saying the U.S. economy requires millions. I don't think any of these visas should be issued unless there's full employment for the American people, and we know there isn't. The corporate media will say, oh, unemployment is only 3 or 5% or some such number. That's just the number of people, the percentage of people who lost their jobs like in the last couple of weeks. Behind that is another group of long-term unemployed. It's a separate category, so they don't count it as part of the overall jobless rate. But there's almost 100 million people in that category. And if you go over to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and you look at the labor participation rate, you will see it is very, very low. And we have these Democrats bringing in migrants and visa workers and refugees, just pouring them into the country to stress an already strained job market. When you add to that, on top of that, the offshoring of many jobs to other countries and the increasing use of automation, this is a bad time to be an American worker. Now, Bulgaria has become the latest nation to basically pull out of the United Nations Migration Pact. And they stated that they're doing it to protect the country's interests. And they're saying we've got to protect our borders. And probably a lot of these countries are realizing this is an attempt by the United Nations to basically take away the borders, start erasing the borders, which is what they want for the New World Order and globalism. So the United States pulled out of this agreement last year, and so far Hungary, Austria, and Poland have pulled out or expressed reservations. Now it's Bulgaria. All right, so let's talk about Great Britain and Brexit, because things are getting very, very intense there. As we reported yesterday, the Tory government, Theresa May's government, was literally found to be in contempt of Parliament. And even her own party is starting to oppose her. Apparently, the number of Tory member of parliaments who oppose Theresa May and oppose her Brexit deal has grown to 103. So at this point, it does not look like her little checkers Brexit deal is going to pass its vote. Now, because of that contempt ruling, or the contempt vote, the Tories were forced to release the legal details on the Brexit deal. And apparently, members of Parliament are furious. They're saying it's unthinkable, that it is really horrible, horrible for Great Britain. In fact, one politician described it as the worst possible outcome. So it's really going to be ugly over there. Now, Mervyn King is out there saying that Theresa May's Brexit deal is an historic error of monumental incompetence. And when you have Tony Blair and Boris Johnson uniting in their condemnation of Theresa May's deal, you know something has gone really, really wrong. And the agreement is less a carefully crafted diplomatic compromise and more like a surrender flag. And that last caller was absolutely right. If Theresa May does not get her checkers deal approved, and if she calls for a second Brexit vote and hires a lot more election riggers, a global revolution from all this efforts at creating a global government, and everybody is just, they're tired of it all. They're tired of the taxes. They're tired of the open borders. In fact, I got an email from somebody saying that the riots in France actually are mostly about the open borders. Or that's a big part of it. But the protesters can't say that because then they can be arrested for a hate crime. Because in France, you're not allowed to criticize the open border agenda or the migrants, the refugees. Now, Denmark is looking at building special prisons abroad where criminal foreigners will be sent. They're trying to send a signal that such people will not be allowed to remain in the country. And Lithuania is one of the East European nations Denmark is currently negotiating with in order to place criminal migrants sentenced to expulsion. And so, according to Denmark's new policy, criminal foreigners sentenced to expulsion should be imprisoned abroad. Okay, here's an interesting little poll. This is from Information Clearinghouse. Right now, and this is very revealing, 34% of U.S. Americans believe U.S. elites exploited 9/11 for gain. Well, politicians are going to exploit anything that happens for gain. But to me, this is saying that we do have a sizable portion of the American people who are really starting to figure out how government really does work and how it manipulates us and uses us. Now, here's a positive story. Got to have a little good news shoved in there. Otherwise, I'm going to have to spend the rest of the show doing funny cat videos or something like this. Over in California, there's this property developer, Karen Kramer, and she's owner of Blue Wave Solutions. She had a $1 million condo that she received 2 offers for. And she's put all the deals on hold because she's using this apartment to house some of the families who lost everything in last month's wildfire. And Kramer said that housing a family means more than securing a sale in the long run. So there's somebody who's rich who's got a conscience. That really is great. Now, also related to the fire, and we knew this was going to happen from just how gargantuan the fires were allowed to burn. Apparently, a state judge has ruled that Merced Property and Casualty Company cannot meet its obligations after last month's Camp Fire. And so they're going under. Merced's assets are about $23 million, but it faces about $64 million in outstanding liabilities just in the city of Paradise. So Merced is now being taken over by the California Department of Insurance to take control of Merced, and according to the court documents, the state's Conservation and Liquidation Office will start liquidating what's left of the company, which basically means that everybody who had a policy with Merced is probably not going to get the expected payouts. They'll get something. Will it be enough to restart their lives? And again, ineptitude was behind the fires. Governor Moonbeam wanting to let nature go back to being nature. You can't do that, or you're going to have a disaster. Happens over and over again. They even did it to Yellowstone. The wildlands have to be managed in order that they do not become a threat to the urban areas, which is exactly what happened here. All right, here's an interesting little story. Well, it's more than interesting. It is a little bit tragic. And the story came out of government slaves. Apparently, there was this woman, Crystal Thomas, and police were executing a search warrant at Thomas' home looking for her 16-year-old son who was suspected of robbing a store. And Crystal Thomas let them in and said, you know, he's not here. We haven't seen him since he became defiant. He doesn't live here anymore. The police proceeded to smash out the windows, kick in the doors, literally tear the place apart. They even wrecked the little basketball hoop out front, like this kid could be hiding inside. And so now this mother and her children are homeless, just ahead of Christmas. So anyway, now we've been talking about this all week, and there's probably going to be some other incidents like this, but apparently to the liberal snowflakes, Christmas has become a trigger word. And it really is absurd. You know something? One of the steps to get back to being a civil and polite society is to have respect for other people's points of view, traditions, and beliefs. Doesn't mean you got to go along with it. But just say, okay, if you want to celebrate Christmas, go ahead. And if you don't, fine, go do something else here. We talked about how this animated classic, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, first aired in 1964. It's now being denounced for promoting bullying and homophobia and verbal abuse. Then we have that song, the Oscar-winning tune, Baby It's Cold Outside, is now being accused of being a date rape anthem. Apparently, Deck the Halls is now under criticism because it promotes gay apparel. Santa Baby is under attack. It's being denounced for slut-shaming. And White Christmas is racist because it's white. Yeah, that's what snow is here. Apparently, one publishing company has issued a redacted version of Clement Clark Moore's famous poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," in order to be more health conscious. The company edited out Moore's mention of Santa smoking a pipe. Now, after a year of Scrooges and Grinches, war, we could all use a little Christmas cheer right now. But the liberals don't want you to have that. They don't want you to have a good time. It goes against their grain. Apparently, over in the town of Severance, Colorado, it is now against the law to have a snowball fight. Apparently, over at Princeton University, they have an a cappella group that used to sing a song called Kiss the Girl from the Disney movie The Little Mermaid. They're now dropping that because of concern that maybe the girl didn't consent. This is really getting silly. And maybe this is avoidance behavior. Maybe people just are so desperate not to have to pay attention to what's really going on in the world that they're just getting themselves buried in this nonsense. All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today. And I'm just looking at this video from France. It's about 12 minutes long. And it's just talking about all the destruction over there, the violence. Some of the police are standing with the protesters. And this could be the beginning of a real revolution. And the fact that Macron is using these explosive tear gas grenades that can actually injure and kill people, I don't think it's going to help. I do not think it's going to help. I think the French people are mad, and this is just going to make them even angrier. All right, so as you know, we're getting into Christmas, and you're probably looking for presents for your children, usually of a cyber nature, but you do need to be careful. Now, there's this tablet aimed at children aged between 3 and 9 years, and apparently it has a severe security flaw which would allow outside hackers to spy on your children. Known as the InnoTab Max or the Storio Max, it sells for about $120. The supposedly safe tablet allows parents to approve a website before their children can visit it. Sounds like a good idea. But apparently, customers with affected devices are at risk of criminals being able to take control of the gadget and snoop on the children, even watch them through the built-in webcam. As we mentioned yesterday, Wells Fargo is now acknowledging that over 500 houses were foreclosed because of a computer glitch. And Wells Fargo's out there saying they're really sorry. I hope that's not the end of it. But you know how bankers can be. Now, this is a very, very sad story, okay? This actually happened a while back, but it's worth mentioning. There was this 16-year-old student who had sex with a female classmate and apparently recorded it on his cell phone. Now, the girl later said that she believed Corey had played the recording for his friends. There's actually no indication that he actually did. That prompted the authorities to summon Corey to the principal's office and basically threatened him with child porn charges, and he wound up committing suicide. Now, here's a good one. Last story for the show today here. There was this police officer who pulled over this car that was driving at 80 miles an hour. Then the car started off again, and he had to jump on the hood to avoid being run over. And according to the public defender, the woman driving the car was on psychiatric medication. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he has lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know, and please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. Have a really good rest of your day, and aloha, America.